I'm just going to have to start. Good afternoon, everyone. We will resume the Community Development Committee meeting with item 14, which is draft local alcohol policy deliberations on submissions. And I'd like to invite Julie and Peter, I think, to come and present that. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. This is a report back following consultation on the LAP submissions. You will recall before lockdown, about 1,000 years ago, you heard those submissions. There are a range of views expressed at that time, falling broadly, as you would entirely expect, into two pretty opposed positions. As you know, the LAP process has limited scope and can only consider a limited number of matters, following a closely prescribed purpose. We're recommending changes to the proposal and a way forward following the submissions process. We would note that there are potentially endless combinations of policy positions that could be achieved through a policy such as this one. The recommendation is to consult on a revised LAP proposal, but also note that the commentary in the report that if their recommendation isn't followed, that perhaps councillors would like to consider whether further work will be pursued on this draft policy. We're happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Julie. Questions, councillors? Surely not. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I suppose on my reflection on the process to date and reading of the report, was that we've gone out with something that rightly or wrongly was perceived as having negative effects in the on-site licenses, and heard quite a bit about that. And now it seems like we're going out with something that is suggesting some changes in the on-site, or if I got the ons and the offs right, suggesting some changes in the supermarket world, and just wondering if we're sort of setting ourselves up for another round of, frustrating the other people that were less frustrated last time and potentially ending up needing to do a third lap.
Very good question. I think no matter what policy you put out, if the policy proposes to make changes, it has impact. There will always be people who feel that's a negative impact for their business. I think what we're proposing is taking on board the submissions that had concerns about how we were trying to address preloading. The proposal we're putting forward this time, I think, takes on board what those submitters were saying. Yes, there is a bigger impact for off licenses, so supermarkets and bottle stores. But taking on board what the submitters have said, I think that's probably the best way forward. Supermarkets almost certainly will feel that this proposal has a bigger impact on their business than the previous one. It's really up to councillors, though, whether that's something they feel is appropriate. The alternative would be to keep it at 10 p.m, which is what was proposed when we went up for consultation last year. The impact would be less, the pushback would be less, but also the impact on alcohol-related harm probably would be less.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, I have one, which is before we went out with the original map, we did talk, I think, about putting some of these additional restrictions that you're proposing in this revised version in response to submitters in. And as I recall, we were told that there wasn't the local evidence to support those. So has something changed in that space?
The question around evidence has always been a tricky one. It's not a black and white issue. It's a question of balance. When we set out the proposals in the 2019 draft, we were identifying what we believed was the best balance between the restrictions that we could impose with the evidence that we had. We're kind of refocusing it. So it's not saying that the evidence we had then was wrong or it's telling us something different now. It's trying to strike the best balance for the best impact. We're also taking into account the views raised by submitters. So the point of consultation is to test those ideas in the community. And for consultation to be meaningful, we have to consider the possibility that we might change our views. I think the points raised by a vast number of submitters raise some very valid questions. So the proposals that we're presenting now reflect how we've revised those in light of what they've suggested.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just add to that too, this is a conversation we've had about the extent of evidence, and in this process, really the submissions process does constitute part of that evidence gathering, I suppose. So that's how it all becomes part of the body of work.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No? Thank you very much. So the recommendations are that the statement of proposal incorporating the revised draft local alcohol policy as attachment 1 be approved for public consultation. Recommendation 2 is that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be authorised to make minor amendment to the statement of proposal prior to public consultation. Given that the Deputy Mayor has a conflict of interest, I propose to amend that to be the Chair of the Community Development Committee, in other words, me. So is someone happy to second that? Well, Alicia, I think would. Councillor Rutherford will second that. So if we can just make that amendment, I'm then happy to move those 2 recommendations, and Councillor Bowen will second them. And we'll open for any comment. Councillor Bowen.
Sorry, microphone. Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm actually, I hesitate to say quite pleased, because this is not a process that leaves anybody feeling particularly pleased. It's been torturous. But I think where we've got to, and accepting the complexity of where we've got to, shows really good engagement with our community and the very diverse views that have come through. Some of that's quite challenging, and that this question about having evidence in our local community has been a challenge all the way through, right from the start of this process, and I think will continue to be a challenge. But where we've got to, in going back out to say, this is what we heard you say, have we now got it right? I feel quite comfortable with that, and I think many of the people who came and presented through that submission process will feel, not all of them got what they want in our renewed proposal, but they will feel like we've listened and we've reflected on that, and we've made the changes that take into account the balance of those views. So I'm pleased to support us going back out again.
Thank you. Any further comment? I certainly agree with going back out again, and I'm actually pleased that we have shown that we've listened to submitters, both in terms of the proposed restrictions on off-licence to prevent preloading, but also in terms of the submissions that we had from the hospitality sector about opening times and so forth. So I think it's a sensible thing to do, even though it will lengthen, obviously, the process. Having gone this far, I think we better try and get it as right as we can. Any further comment from anyone? Okay. Are we happy to take these 2 together? Yeah. Happy for a vote on the voices? Yes. Okay. So let's vote on 1 and 2 together. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you. Can't tell those other people to come back in. Just wait for the other members to come back in before we move on to the work schedule. So we'll move on to the work schedule, which is item 15, and I do have an additional proposal for the work schedule, which I've given to the administrator. It's on the screen. So I've discussed this with the GM, and I think that now that Welcoming Communities programme is council funded, that we should be having an annual report back on what is being done in that programme and what's the aspirations are, particularly as it's an iterative process in getting the different certifications. So the GM was happy for that to go on the work schedule for a report back in November, and I've proposed it, and I think Councillor Bowen was happy to second. Councillor Finlay, you indicated you had something that you wanted to add. Sorry, could you put your microphone on?
I'd like to receive back in the next committee meeting, not so much a report, but a presentation on how things are going at the library since COVID, because I've heard some comments from Greypound members about the amount of people that are sitting there reading and the numbers. So we haven't had a decent, communication with the staff of the library for quite some time. So is it possible to have a deputation or such from the staff of the library of what's happening over there so we as the council can find out?
I don't think it will be a deputation, Councillor, from our own
But
staff.
something along those lines, it doesn't have to be a report, but
I'll pass that over to the GM to comment on. Would you like to talk to staff?
an update if you like.
Councillor Rutherford, did you want to comment?
Thank you. I believe that in the past, this possibly is what Councillor Finlay is alluding to, is we've just had a written update circulated to members around some of the numbers, and because I think what he's alluding to is actually the libraries. We know it's an incredibly successful resource in our community, but it's sort of seems to be booming lately, and so there's some great stories coming out of that, and perhaps that could be circulated, because I'm sure post-COVID and during lockdown there was a lot of online traffic and e-downloads and those sorts of things, and so maybe that's, I think, what you're alluding to.
I'd like to see the staff come and report to us, or, tell us what.
Okay, thank
so we
you.
get questions in.
I'll just let the GM comment. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think I think in this quarter we're reporting no non-financial KPIs. So I know there's a reasonable commentary about library usage that comes through that, and I think I've reviewed the stuff that's coming through. So there's a reasonable commentary on that. But look, I haven't got a problem in terms of providing something, so it might be outside of the committee. I'll have a chat with Heather and we'll work out what the best way is to provide an update on that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty positive story. So no problem.
Yeah, so that's what I'd like. Can we put on the work schedule, because it's something I'd like to see out to the public too. It's something that it's actually we should be crowing about.
Yeah, can I talk to Heather and we'll work out what the most appropriate way is, but we'll consider that. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you want to comment at all on the work schedule as it stands? No. Okay. Any questions on the work schedule? Okay, so are we happy to take 1 and 2 together? Anyone want them separated? Yes, well, that will come on automatically. Yes, so Governance has just mentioned that, of course, the report on the companion card will come on automatically as well. Okay, so if there are no comments on the work schedule, we'll take the 2 together then. So all in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Abstentions? So that's carried. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Councillor Dennison. We'll just have a 5-minute turnaround. Yep, thank you.